Déjà vu is basically a romantic comedy for anybody who's ever thought about, if I could go back and do it over again, what if? That's really what it's all about. So it's déjà vu all over again, and it starts like this. Considering all the ways life had bitch-slapped Nate Evans silly over the years, he thought it a minor miracle that he hadn't gone ballistic long before the Air Force dropped a bomb on his home. But then ballistic is a relative term. Did conking a military officer over the head with a 5-iron count as going ballistic? He knew he wasn't a violent person, so yeah, maybe so. It probably did. What does the military call that? That's what they call collateral damage. Now, at this point, Nate is going through the debris and he's reevaluating his life, and he really hits home for the first time just how pathetic his life has become, how pathetic his life has been. He's a washed-up Hollywood screenwriter who has nothing but flops in his history. And what he really wants more than anything in the world is to go back and do it over again, just like in the movies, like Peggy Sue Got Married and some of the other movies. He wants to go back and do it over again and then try to have the life he thinks he should have had. So what does he do? He does what comes naturally to him, and he writes a script for himself. And he follows the script, and he goes back to his hometown. He moves back in with his hippie mom and dad, back into his old bedroom, and he tries to recreate his high school days with the hope that he's going to be able to reconnect with the girl that he dumped 40 years ago on the eve of the prom, and his life hasn't been good since. Now that girl, Julie Cooper, she was widowed at an early age. She was left to raise 2 children on her own, and she is now the assistant principal back at the old high school where they met and where they got together and where they were sweethearts. Well, he sees this as the perfect way to tell the story and rewrite the story of his life with a happily ever after ending. Except that Julie, when he meets up with her again, Julie is now engaged to the principal, their boss. And so she's the only one who can't see what a schmuck he is. And now Nate has to write a plot to basically destroy their relationship and make sure that she doesn't wind up marrying the wrong guy again. That's what the story is about. What I'm going to read for you is a very short passage here. It's a couple of chapters into the book, and it's called Déjà Vu. It kind of gives you a sense of what the theme of the book is. But more than anything else, I wanted to read it because tonight is Valentine's Day, and this is where the love story actually begins. The dream came to Nate when he was still in his mother's womb. Try as he might, through the years of random reflection, he had no other explanation. It had always been with him. Even at age 55, it was the most vivid of any memory he had in his memory bank. The girl stood 3 steps above him, framed by the large oak door at the entrance to their elementary school. She wore a plaid jumper of navy and gold over a white blouse with a broad collar. On the short white socks at her ankles, a tiny blue ribbon of bow dressed the fold of the socks that she had above her shoes. As the girl smiled down at him from her concrete pedestal, she fingered a single white carnation in one hand. Her other hand rested gently for balance on the black metal railing that drew a line leading up to the door and served as a minor but not insurmountable barrier between them. And there it was that Nate professed his undying love for the girl. She owned his heart. She would always own his heart. And he told her so. "You're the one I love, not anyone else." What did that mean? Whenever the dream escaped into Nate's consciousness, the words were the same. He was too young to really understand them, but those were the words he used. He knew that much, and he knew how it made him feel. Squishy and warm, like a handful of macaroni and cheese. The dream was so natural that he simply took it for granted that it was part of who he was, like the tiny birthmark behind his right ear, about the feet that were too big and he had to grow into them at some point. For the first 6 years of his life, he gave the dream No more thought than accept that it existed. The dream hid in some recess of his soul as he grew from a chubby rugrat into a precocious little human. He didn't notice it through the formative years as he learned to talk and connect dots of comprehension, to make sentences and to express feelings. It surely was there in the background as his emotional neurons clashed and sparked, clinging to one another for survival, shaping his personality. Nate never fully understood its significance until he was much older, much older, at age 6. Nate recognized the girl the moment he saw her for the first time in the flesh. Déjà vu didn't come calling with a simple tap on the shoulder. No, déjà vu lifted Nate by his scrawny shoulders and tossed him with all its might into that familiar dream and onto the sidewalk in front of the school. He didn't know déjà vu from Scooby-Doo, but he knew for certain that he had been there before. He had lived that exact moment. There he was again, and those words were on his tongue. Déjà vu. Nate wouldn't learn that it had a name for years, but no matter. On that day, he only knew that it wasn't a dream after all. He felt it. He breathed it. And it smelled like, well, it smelled like girl. It was all there. Trouble breathing? Check. Sweaty palms? Check. Heart pounding in the throat? Check and double check. And the words, "You're the one I love," they danced on the tip of his tongue, sweet as the first lick of ice cream. Nate knew that he would say those words to her. Déjà vu. The sensation is a fact, even if its cause, its very essence, is a mystery that scoffs at every psychologist, philosopher, paranormal expert, MRI-toting brain scientist, reincarnation disciple, wino and wacko, anybody who had a theory about it. You couldn't get déjà vu got you. Some believed it was nothing more than wishful thinking, an overactive imagination. Buddha might suggest that it was one of our past lives nudging the present. Regardless of whether the sensation was a random clash of memories and desires, a spark of loose wires in the brain, or past lives visiting the present, if déjà vu ever needed a poster boy, Nate came to believe that it picked him. It picked him at that very moment in time when he was 6. He had dawdled the morning away on the first day of first grade. His mother rushed and she dropped him off at the curb, pushed him toward the front door. She had given him a single white carnation, a gift for the new teacher. He paused at the bottom of the steps, turned and waved to his mother as she climbed into the car and drove away. Nate sucked a bit of the cold September air, breathing deeply, and then he looked down at the tips of his black dress shoes, below the cuffs of new brown corduroy pants. That was the school uniform at St. Christopher of the Cross Catholic School, or Crisscross Elementary, to those who hadn't confessed of sin of irreverence to Father Dean, and of course haven't done the requisite penance. Nate was scared and excited, nervous and filled with wonderment that only the promise of adventure could offer. A 10-foot-tall nun stood in her black habit, gathered at the waist by a belt of rosary beads, held open the front door and clanged a bell, a handbell. She called to the stragglers, "Stop loitering, come inside, grow up, get educated, it's time." Well, Nate was lost in absorbing the moment and scarcely felt the awkward bump that changed his world and caused it to stop. The girl had wavy hair to her shoulders, dark brown eyes that twinkled like the 4th of July sparklers whenever she laughed. And through the years, she would laugh easily and she would laugh often when Nate was around. Well, that day in first grade, the girl was just as he had dreamed, right down to her smile. A toothy smile with a shadow of a gap between the front two, and a mouth that was thin on the corners and full round in the middle. The girl knelt down and picked up Nate's white carnation that had fallen to the sidewalk. When she stood, he was certain that she had recognized him too. Her eyes were wide until shyness forced her to look away. The nun clanged her bell. The girl skipped upstairs. At the top, she paused with one hand on the railing. Nate waited until she turned so he could say those words that had been with him ever since birth. But the girl did not turn and smile down upon him as expected. She passed by Sister and disappeared into the building, still clutching his carnation. Well, that wasn't the way things ended the first time this had happened to him, though he couldn't really recall a definitive end to the first encounter with the girl. The difference confused him, but only enough to pause before bounding up the stairs himself and down the hall after her with the aid of a stern but kindly cuff on the back of the head from Sister. A few minutes later, after being led to their desks in the classroom and each desk tagged with their first name printed in block letters on a strip of paper taped to the top, the students took turns standing and introducing themselves to the teacher and to the class. The girl sat at the head of the second row. Nate sat 2 students behind her in the last desk of that row. And when it was her turn, the girl stood, tugged at the sides of her skirt, and toed the floor. Her voice was soft but determined, and from 3 desks away, Nate heard her tell all the world that yes, indeed, she loved him too. Her exact words, "My name is Julie Cooper."